Welcome to the Online Business Launchpad podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Rankin, and today's guest is Cody Limbaugh. Cody has been a strength and conditioning coach for nearly 20 years. He's coached people from all walks of life, from youth teams to retirees, from Olympic athletes to elderly patients recovering from joint replacement surgeries. And Cody is the author of a counterintuitive book, Stop Setting Goals, which grabbed my attention because we're taught, especially as senior managers in the corporate world, that goal setting is everything. Now, Cody and his wife, Tali, co-host the Live All Your Life podcast, and now they're using their 30 plus years of combined coaching experience to help couples reignite their spark through fitness, nutrition, and intimacy practices through their FitTogether coaching program at howtofittogether.com. And I was interested in the fact that they work together as a team. And so I have a lot of questions for Cody about what that's like to work together as a team with your partner. Welcome to the podcast, Cody.
Let's start with who are you, where are you from, what do you do, what's your background?
Our business is called Live All Your Life. And part of the idea with Live All Your Life is my first intention with coming up with that sort of title, if you will, it was to try to take my life and pull all the disparate pieces together and live my life all in one ball, one authentic ball. Like instead of a work Cody and a husband Cody and a father Cody and to bring all those things under one umbrella and just live a very authentic life. And so that's the foundation of our company. We are a larger picture personal development company, but our focus is on teaching a lot of the principles for living a good life, a philosophical approach to living a good life through using fitness analogies and fitness techniques and processes that have helped teach us how to live well in other areas of our lives. A big theme that is common with our podcast and my book and the various things that we put out online is to draw those fitness analogies. And I actually didn't come up with that myself. Aristotle was doing that a long time ago. He used athletes as an example of excellence and the pursuit of excellence as a means to living a well-lived life, a self-examined life of improvement and that kind of thing. So in a nutshell, that's the philosophy of our company. And then as far as who we serve, quite a few different people, but it's not a throw mud at the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. We actually have specific avenues that we serve specific populations. So for instance, in our local gym here, I actually am still coaching in person as well. All of my clients right now are over the age of 60 and some are well into their 70s. One of my clients has Parkinson's and this kind of thing. And in that group of people, that work that we do here in the gym has a massive carryover to the quality of their life in other areas. So I call that my rat pack. They're retired and thriving, and that's my rat pack. And then online, as far as our online business, which is probably more applicable to your audience, my wife and I run a company called FitTogether, all one word, FitTogether. And it's directed at couples who really want to, I would say the sweet spot is probably couples who have been married for, say, 5 to 10 years, right in there. And there's this sort of unfortunate term called the 7-year itch, where after a while, things just aren't that romantic high that you entered the relationship with. And there's bills, there's jobs, and there's sometimes kids and sports, and days are very full, romance and fitness. And I think we can all relate. It's very common for people to get into relationships and gain 20 pounds or whatever. And so our Fit Together program is to help couples both reignite their spark, the intimacy, but also using fitness as a tool for that. So we have a fitness and nutrition program that they're going through together, along with some communication prompts, if you will, to help reignite the intimacy in the relationship that can fall by the wayside when we're just out there living the rest of our life, trying to make it all happen.
It's an interesting concept, at least based on my experience. If you're wanting to change how you eat, if you can't get the other people in your life to do it with you, especially if you're the person who's responsible for creating the meals or whatever, it becomes almost impossible. I had a question. You said it was couples that are married or they've been together for 5 to 10 years. One of the things that's, and you only know this after you've been through it, is that you change as a person from the time that you're in your early 20s. By the time you hit your mid 30s and your early 40s, you have changed. The fundamentals of you are still the same, but your outlook on life, what you think about things, how you relate to people around you, what you're prepared to tolerate and what you're not, has completely changed. How do you help people with that part of being alive with your program?
That's a very insightful question. I love that question a lot. I've actually written about that in my book because my book is a counterintuitive approach to goal setting. In fact, the book's called Stop Setting Goals. But the idea with that is to create a vision for your life that you allow to expand and change, because we do expand and change. And I know, speaking to your point, the goals that I had for myself in my 20s, I spent a lot of time feeling like a failure in my 30s because I did not hit those. And now that I'm almost 50, I'm glad I didn't hit some of those goals because they don't align with my values today. And it's a very good point that you make. And one of the foundations that Tali and I have in our relationship is sometimes referred to as radical honesty, but I'm not sure that I really like that term, because to me, it's you're either honest or you're not. There's not a radical notion to being honest with your partner. But I think sometimes we tend to have a natural tendency to hide things, even people that we are intimately close with, because we're ashamed of it. We don't like this aspect of ourselves, or we're struggling with this change in our lives, or maybe we have an idea of something that we want that's different for our future, and we're afraid to bring it up because we're afraid that our partners might not be on the same page. And we really try to promote this check-in with each other where you're really laying it out on the line. What's your vision? What do you want? Where are you going? And where do you see us in the future, and where we are now? And these kind of questions are sometimes hard to get to. But I think the reason it gets hard is that they're neglected for too long. So Tali and I have a weekly check-in where we ask ourselves 5 basic questions that we check in with each other on. And some of them are very partner focused. What do you love about me? Or what are you struggling with at this moment? A small ask, a small favor that we can do. And there's a few of these questions. We've gone over them on our podcast before, but that weekly check-in and that consistent touching base on things that are easy to just put off because you're afraid of the conflict or afraid of the shame around something that you've changed your mind on, or a desire or something like that. So if we can introduce these little practices of honesty and being very vulnerable with your partner, I think that goes a long way toward allowing both partners to change and grow as individuals, and allowing the relationship to also change and grow with those individuals.
I'm curious because this could be applied on levels. The first level is your partners. You're together in life. You have an intimate relationship, but you also have a business relationship as well. And do you do that same exercise for both of those things, or is it slightly different for your business relationship?
That's a really good question. And I would say it is slightly different, but related. Just like I was talking about living your life all in one big bubble and being authentic in every area. And one thing that we've had to, just to be vulnerable and share something with you and your audience, we don't always agree on every aspect of what we want to do in the business or where we want to go with it. One of the reasons we have a local coaching business, in fact, is that my wife loves the in-person community aspect of what we coach in the gym. And when people are, for lack of a better word, suffering together in a gym environment, it goes a long way toward building intimacy and relationship with people when they're going through something together. And so there's a beautiful community aspect to that that's very difficult to find in an online community. And there's technologies that are helping to get there, but it's really nothing like sweating together in the same room and failing in front of other people and the intimacy that gains. So that part of the business largely exists because of her, because she needs that in-person interaction, and she is a little averse to building online products. But that's part of our business model to build online products. And one of the aspects, to get back to your question, is to be very honest with your partner about what I'm good at and what I enjoy, and divvying up those tasks, responsibilities, and maybe even the vision for the business in different aspects based on each individual's strengths. I love the idea of touching more lives. And so I understand her aspect of wanting that in-person relationship, but I know that I only have so many hours of the day that I can coach people. And so to me, online products represent an opportunity to touch thousands or maybe even millions of lives. And I see, as I look out into the world, that there's a great need for what we teach and what we have to offer. We live in a society that's, unfortunately, I look out and I feel like our whole society as a whole is unhealthy, physically, mentally, sometimes intellectually. Relationships are broken. We're living in a very, and I suppose every generation probably feels this way, but we're living in this very kind of tumultuous time where we see wholesale shifts in our culture. And this may sound grandiose, but I feel like I have an opportunity to maybe have a positive influence on that. And I know that can only be done online. So that may be a little bit more than what you were asking for, but I think it takes a lot of honesty and vulnerability for your partner to be able to say, I know we're building an online business, but I don't like sitting in front of a computer. I don't want to do that part. And so for her to be honest with me about that, and for me, and likewise, I love coaching in person. Don't get me wrong. I have a strong passion for it. I leave the gym high every day because I just love what I'm doing. But I also don't like the idea of being tied to a brick and mortar building like a job for however many years I'm doing this, which would probably be the rest of my life. So that kind of honesty with your partner, I think, is very critical, because you don't want to, anytime you fail to mention something, what you're doing is planting the seed of future resentment. The sooner you can bring something up, whether it's your marriage partner or your kids or your business partner or whatever that is, I think the sooner you can address something when it's small, you don't plant that seed for future growing resentment.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, I just want to dig a little bit more into the details around the business partnership, because there's a process that you have to go through, and it involves trust, where you basically have to decide who's doing what. You get into the whole process of doing, and then you have to look at the results, and you have to have conversations around what works and what doesn't. And how do you handle, or how did you handle, the dividing up of duties, tasks, like who does the finances, who creates the products, all those sorts of things, and then who does customer service? How did you decide who was going to do what, and how do you check in with each other in terms of how that's going and working?
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the E-Myth or any of the concepts around that, but it's a classic business book or entrepreneurial book. And it really instructs entrepreneurs, especially solopreneurs or small businesses, to write a structure out for your business of every role and every duty that there is in that business, from coming up with large concepts all the way down to mopping the floors. Every duty is outlined. And then even if you're the only person, you assign yourself all these jobs. You put your name in all the boxes, right? Or in a partnership, you might divvy that out based on strengths, weaknesses, desires, and that kind of thing. And what we find is there's three categories, I guess you could say. There's things that I'm pretty passionate about and good at, and there's things that Tali is very passionate about and good at. And then there's some things that we both suck at. And so in those early stages where you wear all the hats as an entrepreneur, sometimes you just have to endure those things. But I think I think people wait too long to get help. I think that's one of the biggest failures that I see in small businesses, especially with people who are starting an online business, who may be starting it as a side hustle or just bootstrapping a little piece at a time. I think that they build a picture up that I need all these resources and then I can hire somebody to produce my podcast or whatever that is. And you'd be surprised how inexpensive that you can find help very early. and how much more effective it is. I remember the first time I hired somebody to do some organizational things like this with prospect follow-ups and that kind of thing. And it was a job that I was neglecting because I just wasn't good at it. I didn't enjoy it. And I actually hired somebody just for a couple hours a week to do it. And the amount of work that they got done in an hour versus what I got done in an hour blew me away. I was like, this is so worth it because they're good at it. They enjoy doing this sort of detail-oriented thing. With Tali and I, we really try to feed into each other's strengths. And so as we're divvying out those roles, you're really good at this. So I do most of the exercise programming for our clients, and she does the nutrition counseling because she has a deep history of focusing on nutrition from even a young age of having an eating disorder and overcoming that, and her relationship with food. It can be a very emotional and deep-seated issue for people, and she is amazing at that, and I'm not. And so those two big examples of things that we take on for each other. But then when it comes to mopping the floors, we just take turns because that's just nobody's really passionate about going to do that. But again, the sooner you can hire out those things, I think you'll see the faster your business will flourish, because then everybody's doing something that they're passionate or good at when you can start to hire out those small things that you don't enjoy as much.
I've got one more quick question about this whole partnership approach to running a business. And that is typically, at least in my experience anyway, and maybe it's cultural, it might not be just cultural, but typically there's this concept that you can only have one decision maker in a business. Somebody has to hold the can or be responsible for making that final decision and being responsible if it all goes pear-shaped. When you're running a partnership, it's not quite like that. How do you handle that whole, we've got to make a decision, we don't agree, how do you come to a conclusion?
To reiterate a little bit of what I was talking about with the roles, I think one way to handle that is that you have specific decisions for specific roles. When it comes to designing an online program, I might have more of a final say of what that looks like because that's the role that I'm in the business. But of course, that doesn't cover everything. And when those things come up, it's a really good question. But I feel like going back to my point of frequent touch points and brutal honesty. I don't like the word brutal. It's just honest, right? It's just honesty. But if you're really checking in often, you're less likely to come up upon these big decisions that you're butting heads on because you know where the other person's been all along and where this is going. I actually have had other business partners in the past that didn't work out so well. And I think it's okay. I think sometimes we look at the failing of a business or the breaking off of a partnership as some sort of failure. But I think sometimes we just learn we don't want the same things. And that's okay. And I think it's a victory when you're able to walk away from something like that and go build something else, because then you can stay true to yourself, your values, your desires, and your vision. And that other person is also free to do that rather than try to just make things work. So I guess part of the answer there is it's okay to disagree sometimes, even if it means changing the business model or changing what you're doing.
Now, I want to follow this thread a little bit, but take just a little bit of a direction change. When you are working in partnership, whether you're working by yourself, and even if you don't have a business and you're working in corporate or you're working for another organization, there's a huge focus on goals. And one of the things that made me go, ooh, this could be interesting, I could be interesting talking with you, was the fact that you have written this book about goals and you've taken a very contrarian view to the conventional wisdom around you've got to set a goal, you have to have goals, you have to, et cetera, et cetera. Can you just explain your thinking about goals and why you think we've got the wrong end of the stick when it comes to goals?
Sure. There's two primary aspects that I'd like to cover on this, possibly like a subcategory. So a subcategory of goals, I'll just start with that one, is what I call engineering goals. And when we talk about things like the SMART goal paradigm, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. I call those engineering goals. And so if Elon Musk is sending a rocket out to meet with the space station, there's a specific time that they must absolutely they must hit that goal, or the launch doesn't happen, and it might cost millions of dollars to delay that launch or whatever. But those are engineering problems, and even though they could be very complex, we're talking about rocket science here, it's of the complexity, it is still dealing with many known factors. And so they know the amount of thrust it takes to get a certain amount of weight off the ground at a certain speed. These are engineering problems that have been overcome. Most of the things that we want to achieve in our life don't really fall into that category of known variables. There are many unknown variables. And so the SMART goal paradigm, I think, really falls apart when we try to really attach ourselves to specific outcomes at specific times, done in specific ways. And we really fall into this trap. I must do A, B, and C because I want D at the specific time. And life just doesn't work that way most of the time. So part of letting go of that is I like to couch it in just different language. And I say, okay, here's the vision we have. Now let's make sure that our trajectory is moving toward that vision. And we can do that with milestones. We don't necessarily have to have a time-bound goal, but what we can do is create practices, daily habits that are in line with our vision. If I want a top-ranking podcast, for instance, it helps to be consistent and get a podcast out every week or every 2 weeks or whatever that is. I can improve the quality of the work that I'm doing. I cannot ensure certain number of listeners by a certain date. That's completely out of my control, right? And so part of what I really try to get people to do is really focus on the things that are in their control. And the vast majority of time, there are many wealthy CEOs out there that talk about results. And I understand that's their job, is to talk about results for shareholders or whatever. But if I can get people to really focus on their habits, their practices, their daily actions, regardless of the results, they can feel good that they are working toward their vision. And then you can look in the past instead of looking in the future, because the future is very nebulous, but the past, as far as we know, actually happened. And so you can look at the results of your actions over time and say, I could be doing this better because this will get me to my vision sooner or in a better way. So you can course correct, you can change, and you can make decisions based on what your actions have produced so far to fine tune and improve that process. But you're still allowing yourself the flexibility to.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Going.
You're still allowing more fluidity and flexibility to feel like you're making progress on a daily basis rather than an I'll be happy when process, which is a lot of times what goals turn into. I'll be happy when I achieve this or that. And by focusing on your daily practices, you actually feel a sense of victory every day because I did my practices today. My goal isn't to lose 20 pounds or have six-pack abs. My practice is to get intentional movement in every day. And every time I do that, it's a victory.
I like that approach because I think it helps, especially for people like us, entrepreneurs who tend to be fairly driven. And you end up with these long lists of things you got to do. And just basically having a system, pardon me, that takes away that whole, I'm a failure because I didn't tick everything off. Is really helpful. I think that's really valuable. I'll put a link to your book in the show notes so that people can go and check out the book if they're interested in just having a slightly different view on that whole concept of goals and goal setting. I want to come back and help people understand a little bit more about you yourself and how you got to the place where you've actually got into the whole entrepreneurship space. You've got a sort of a bricks and mortar coaching practice. You've got online products and things that you use to help people in that sort of space. But tell us more about yourself and how you got there.
I feel like I've always had the entrepreneurial bug. I've been a business owner of some kind since I was about 6 years old because I was a very small child. I lived next to this volcanic butte where there's lots of volcanic glass, obsidian. And I used to collect those rocks and I would take them around the neighborhood and try to sell them door to door. So I feel like I've always had the bug of entrepreneurialism. And I guess if you fast forward into my late 20s, I was a very young father, got married very young from a small town. It's a very common thing in rural areas to just finish school, you get married. That's the course of life. But I found myself in a situation where I was failing financially. I was a mortgage banker at the time, which is extremely volatile. And this was right before the whole mortgage collapse of 2006, or when was that? Yeah, 2007, right in there. And so I was pretty overweight and actually got very sick. And I missed about 6 weeks of work because I had pneumonia in my chest. I couldn't hardly get up a flight of stairs. And so I'm looking at all this financial struggle and my health struggle and thinking, I really need to, something has to change. I'm only in my late 20s and I feel like I'm just struggling here. And I was reading a Zig Ziglar book at the time called See You at the Top. He's a classic. I don't know if everybody's even heard of him these days, but his book, See You at the Top, he's got a picture of himself on the back cover. And he's this tall, slender man. If you know about Zig Ziglar, you have this image of he's 6'3" and just a handsome fella. And in the book, he said when he started writing the book, he was something like 300 pounds. He was obese when he started writing the book. And he said, for me to write a book about success, discipline, and all these things that he was writing about, he says, I feel like a fraud publishing this unless I get my health in check. And so by the time it goes to publish, I want to be healthy. And there he is, a picture of him on the back cover looking like Zig Ziglar we all know, this slender, fit gentleman in a suit. And so I was reading that book at this time that I was going through all these struggles. And I thought, maybe I love to teach. It's something that I've always loved to do, absorb information, distill it, and turn the light on for somebody else. It's just, there's no greater high for me than that. And so I thought, if I become a personal trainer or something like that, maybe I would have the knowledge to get myself in shape and do something that I love, which is teaching, and hopefully be financially successful enough that I can take care of my kids. So it was a very basic shift there, but I went from mortgage banker to personal trainer there in a 1 year span. I lost 75 pounds myself, and that's where it all started. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, because anybody who's ever tried to lose even 1 pound knows how hard it can be, because it's not just about, it is all about the food you put in your mouth, but it's more than that. It's about why you put that food in your mouth and what are you doing in between putting food in your mouth. It's all wrapped up in our emotions, our perceptions of ourselves and things like that. So that's pretty incredible to be able to lose that much weight, and also just that personal transformation for yourself. That's fascinating. In terms of the business that you set up, so I'm asking this question for the listeners who might be thinking about, how can I use my own personal experience to then help set up a business? How much of that experience and what you've learned along that way have you brought into being able to help the people that you work with?
Something you mentioned earlier on, maybe before we were officially in the discussion here, is that you were talking about just needing to be a step ahead of the people who are learning from you. When I was a high schooler, I used to give saxophone and guitar lessons. I'm not good at either one of those instruments, but I was better than the grade school kids that I was tutoring. And so you just need to know a little bit more than your students. And I think it's very valuable for people to remember that if they want to start out on an entrepreneurial journey, you have something of value. Just the fact that you are a unique individual and you have unique experiences makes you uniquely qualified to teach something. And so if you are able to take something that's nebulous for somebody else and distill it into something that's simple and teachable, then you have a product. That's all you really need to get started. I started coaching my first personal training client back when I was still losing that weight in that first year. I was still reading textbooks, and I would design workouts between workouts. I would be reading my textbook to learn how to do it. 20 years later, I'm a different kind of coach. But I didn't wait, in fact, you can't wait to be an expert, because you will never be an expert if you're just in your room studying. You have to actually go out and experience. And so the more you teach, the better you get at teaching, and it just snowballs from there. So I guess my advice would be to find something that you feel is of value to you, that you've learned in your life or that you've experienced. And then ask yourself if you have any sort of passion or draw to teach other people that. And it could be anything. It could be calligraphy, Excel, or anything. But if you have a drive and a love for something like that, then teaching it to other people is a joy. And the more practice you get at teaching it, the better you'll get at teaching it. And so don't be afraid to just have some guinea pigs in the beginning that you experiment with and become friends with, and learn the art of teaching those skills or that knowledge that you have.
I think that's really good advice, especially the bit about you learn by doing. And if you're one step ahead of somebody else, they'll be happy to learn from you, because you are so much closer to their situation and understand the issues and challenges that they have than you would be if you were 5 years down the road.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point. My wife and I talked quite a bit that she and I had athletic backgrounds when we were kids. And in fact, I was in such poor shape. Just to give you an example, when I started my personal training studies, I thought I better get in shape if I'm going to do this, right? I went out on the grade school track in my local community, and I thought I'll just run around it once today, and then tomorrow I'll try 2 laps or whatever. I made it halfway around, and then I walked back to my car and vomited. That I don't have any sort of athletic background. But the thing is, I believe that makes me a better coach, because I understand what it feels like to start there. I didn't go from being a fit kid to a fit teenager to a fit college athlete and into the gym. I started in the gym when I was 30, and it was hard. And so I guess I'm just saying that because I think a lot of people have imposter syndrome around, I'm not good enough, I'm not an expert, I'm not a this, I'm not a that. And I never have been, and I never will be an elite athlete. But I consider myself a fairly elite coach after 2 decades of doing it. But I think my lack of experience has actually been a benefit in my approach to teaching, because I can meet people where they're at. I think that's a good takeaway for anybody on anything. If not only do you only have to be one step ahead of your students, but sometimes you're working through problems as you teach makes you a better teacher.
Yes, and you're much more likely to be able to hit the points that are the barriers stopping people. If you look back on something, it's really just a little molehill. But when you're facing it at the time, it's a huge mountain to get over. And if you've got somebody who's just conquered that mountain last week or last month or last year, then you're going to be able to listen to them, and it's going to just be so much more than if somebody had done it, like I said, 5 years ago. Cody, this has been so useful. I know that people will find it useful. If they're interested in either getting in touch with you or learning more about what you do, where would they go?
I think the best place to find us, since we're on a podcast or on YouTube or wherever you're seeing this, is to check out ours at Live All Your Life. Live All Your Life is the podcast title. We are going to be putting them up on YouTube. We haven't yet, but anywhere podcasts are available, so Spotify, Apple, and all those places. And that'll lead you to all of our other things, because we take very good show notes, and there's links to all the stuff we're doing and talking about on there. So we have a couple of different series in the podcast that I think might be interesting for people. One is the philosophy of fitness, where we break down what I was describing before, where we take principles that we learn in the gym and see how we can apply those to business or relationships or other aspects of our lives. And then every once in a while, we also do an entrepreneurial check-in. So we talk about our business on the podcast as well. So that might be of value to your audience.
Definitely. And like I said, we'll put those in the show notes. Thanks again, Cody. It's been great.
It's been fun chatting with you. I appreciate it a lot.